Hello, studio teacher friends. You are listening to episode 116 of the Beyond Measure podcast with me, Christina Whitlock, your anytime piano teacher friend. Today's episode is short and sweet, and it's simply a highlight of something I have been saying in my teaching over and over again lately. I'm hoping it's something of great value for you as well. A few years back, I had a young student show up for his lesson quite distraught over his piece. He was convinced that he was never going to learn a particular passage. He'd really tried to figure it out at home, but he just kept spinning his wheels over and over again about the same problem. I wish I could tell you what piece it was or what the problem was, but I just don't remember. What I do remember was his response after the light bulb went off. It was one of those scenarios where I had helped him work through the problem in like 60 seconds or less. It was a very quick solution to what he originally thought was a very big problem. Well, his reaction was so endearing. He was shocked and delighted, and he just couldn't believe that he could accomplish the passage that he just conquered. He played it over and over again, telling me he just couldn't believe it. It was, as you know, one of those moments that music teachers just live for. And then he said something that still impresses me to this day. He said, "Mrs. Whitlock, you just turned my question mark into a big old exclamation point." Don't you love that? Turning question marks into exclamation points? Well, I have to thank my little buddy Carter for saying those words, because earlier this year, as one of my students was warming up, it hit me. When it comes to scales and to pieces that we are prepping for performance or whatever the case may be, don't we need more of our students to play as though their musical sentiment ended in an exclamation point? Of course, what I'm actually looking for are things like confidence, consistency, stability, all things that I ask students for all the time. But since the real magic of teaching is the ability to say the same thing over and over again in as many different ways as possible, this idea really is a gold mine. I cannot tell you the number of sloppy scale players that I have seen snap into shape this year just by telling them that I need their scale to sound like it ends with an exclamation point instead of a question mark. Students always laugh at the question mark thing because they all know when they're working through a scale in, what I call exploration mode rather than really playing it in demonstration mode. You know what I mean? You know those precious looks that our students throw us when they finish playing something questionable because they are just dying to know if we thought it was right? I call students out for that look all the time because, of course, I want them to know if it was accurate or not. Enter the exclamation point. Students get that. I mean, assuming they know what punctuation marks are, of course. There is that. And again, it's not like this only applies to scales. Let's talk about repertoire pieces. How many times do we have a student who plays things correctly? I mean, the accuracy is there, but they are just not fully committed to the piece. The sparkle is missing, the sharpness, the feeling that they are fully in control of the piece that they are playing. You guys, I have spent so many hours of my teaching life speaking words around these ideas. So many words. And now, by and large, as soon as I say exclamation point, my students get it. Of course, this does fit right into my whole perspective about the importance of talking less. There is an entire episode of this podcast dedicated to the importance of talking less. That is episode 42, and I have linked that and several other episodes pertinent to this topic in the notes for today's show. You can find those at christinawhitlock.com/episode 116. And on that note, in the name of talking less, I am going to begin to wrap up today's quick little episode right now. Let this be a reminder, friends, that most of the time, it's better to leave our students with one really great idea rather than piling on a million different suggestions. If your student can leave their lesson with one clear takeaway, then wow, are those going to rack up quickly over time. With that, I am grabbing this hefty cup of coffee sitting next to me, and I'm raising it to you. Let's toast. Music teacher friends from all over the world, today we gather together and celebrate the fact that less is oh so often more. I hope you've enjoyed this little idea of inviting your students to play as though their work is followed by an exclamation point, rather than a question mark. It is, of course, just one more idea to put in your teacher toolbox. But hey, who couldn't use more of those? Cheers to finding out what works. Hear, hear. And that's it for today, friends. Before we go, I do want to give a quick shout out to my Patreon friends. We had our first installment of Teachers Teaching Teachers on February 24th, and it was so enlightening. It was so good, you guys. I am already very much looking forward to our next meeting on March 31st. So if you have not yet considered joining the Patreon community, I would love to welcome you in. Details can be found in today's show notes at christinawhitlock.com/episode 116. Thanks for joining me today, friends. If you have a tip from your teacher toolbox that you would like to share, I would love to hear it. And who knows, maybe it would be featured on a future episode of the Beyond Measure podcast. Send me a message on Facebook or Instagram, or email me at beyondmeasurepodcast@gmail.com. That's all for now. Onward and upward toward more exclamation marks.